everybody. Welcome to Terror Talk.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the show today. Today we are having films inspired by true disturbing events episode. It's really not so much the films because, of course, there's like documentaries and a Lifetime movie that was made of this story. These Lifetime movies, I swear to God, they're some of the most disturbing.
Lifetime, my friends and I still talk about, like, do you remember when we used to watch things like 13 and Pregnant and Mother May I Sleep with Danger? Like, Lifetime is like, it makes any young girl fear becoming a woman.
It's so crazy because they have all the women violent movies.
It's all these women, and literally, I just remember as teenage or preteen girls, we would watch these, and it's like, if you want any fear mongering around becoming a woman in the world, just watch Lifetime.
Just watch Lifetime.
Just watch, like, you're going to get pregnant, die, get raped, assaulted, or like burnt alive by the time you're 20.
Yeah, because today is no exception. We are talking about a girl that was basically kept in a box for many, many years.
I mean, literally was kept in a box.
This sadist, yeah. So let me back up and say that one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this particular case today is that Cameron Hooker, who is the man who perpetrated these crimes, the jury trial was delayed, but is going to be up for parole basically in August of 2024. That's not exactly what's happening. So let me just say what's happening. So it was supposed to be in March. It was delayed because the prosecutors were looking to prepare a report for the court, so to speak. Let's say that's why. But they postponed it to August, and so it's very topical. And this trial is going to determine if Cameron Hooker will continue to be deemed a quote-unquote SVP, which is a sexually violent predator. Prosecutors say that if Hooker is deemed an SVP, he'll remain in prison. And if not, they say he would be released into a halfway home at this point. He is currently a convicted criminal here in California for the Girl in the Box case, which obviously is the kidnapping and torture of Colleen Stan. And she was held as a sex slave for 7 years between 1977 and 1984. At the end of this episode, Kathy's going to get into a little bit about that and discuss it a little bit more and how that might play out. And then in August, of course, we'll do a follow-up with whatever the results are from this particular trial. So you know, on the morning of May 19th, 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan decided to hitchhike in Oregon, and she was going home to Northern California, and she was going to attend a friend's birthday party. Mm-hmm. And she spent most of the day accepting rides from various strangers, different people. And for those of you who don't know, in the 70s, this was super common. Mm-hmm. And this is why a lot of the serial killers, as we've discussed before, had a lot of people to pick from because the culture still had this hitchhiking. And it's because of all the serial killers that were active in the 70s and 80s that most people no longer hitchhike, right? She spent most of the day, like I said, getting lots and lots of rides, making her way slowly down there. And then 23-year-old Cameron and his 19-year-old wife, Janice, picked her up. Now, what happens between then and many, many years later is that Colleen is kept against her will, forced to wear a box around her head initially, and then forced to sleep in a coffin-sized. I think it's actually smaller and thinner than a coffin, honestly.
Oh, I think so too.
That Cameron built.
It had to fit under the bed, so
it was under the bed, and the bed was propped up, and there was enough space for them to like open a door and have her crawl in. But she was kept in that box, and she had to urinate and defecate in that box and lived in that box unless she was allowed to come out. And she was fed a story about how there was this thing called the company and that she was to become a official slave and signed a contract. And she was afraid that the company she really believed, this is where the coercion will come in. We're both going to talk a little bit about that. She was told that the company was going to come and they would kill her family, etc., if she didn't follow the rules, stay a slave. And she was basically confined to that box for 23 hours a day. And she was repeatedly sexually assaulted, beaten. Cameron was a sadist, is a sadist. And his wife was there. Mm-hmm. And so that's another part of the story. And at one point she was, I think this is maybe the entry point into us talking about coercion and trauma bonding and different things that can happen in that long of a captivity. She was allowed to visit her family at one point, but she was so brainwashed by this idea of the company and so fearful that she basically got through the visit, told them she was fine, and then went back into captivity with Cameron. So I want to talk a little bit about that, Kathy.
I didn't watch the Lifetime movie, but I watched some documentaries and just some folks that talked about the case in general. And they did mention, she had a lot of opportunities as time went on, because I think it was 7 years, right? That she was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to think like in a coercively controlling dynamic, that idea really is to like, if you are the perpetrator, is you essentially you're wearing them out and you're wearing them down to the point where their entire psyche changes out of survival. Just to preface, like sometimes we'll hear people say things like, I don't understand why you didn't just leave, or if this was really that bad, why did you stay? Which comes up in the trial, by the way, and we'll talk about that later. And the most simplistic way to answer that without going into all of the rabbit holes of psychology would be to describe it like our emotional brains have a defense strategy to remain sane and in control by making ourselves believe we have a choice. Okay. Now, if you really look at this case, she didn't have a choice at the beginning, and she fought at the beginning, and she tried to make autonomous decisions at the beginning, like whether she was going to eat or not eat, or to the point where she learned that if she didn't, it would be shoved down her throat or there would be more torture. So when you are with someone who's coercively controlling, they will plant seeds at the beginning that gets the subconscious or unconscious emotional brain of the survivor or victim or target to essentially understand that if they don't collaborate with their abuser, that the abuser will double down. Okay, so this is like, it's pernicious in the sense that it isn't this one thing that happens. It's over the course of time. In order for her to survive without completely disassembling or psychologically annihilating, her brain starts to develop like what we call cognitive dissonance, which means she has to find a reason for why she is still there. It's twofold. So the first part is the unconscious part, which is I'm going to make myself believe that I am a participator in my abuse because that makes me feel more in control. And, after all, he is keeping me alive. He's feeding me. Now he's allowing me to go out into the yard, even into the city. And over time, because of this ability that they have to strip the victim of their sense of self, the victim now no longer really knows how to be in the absence of this person who they've literally robbed the victim of their entire personality and sense of self. So they feel this like not only obligatory sense of like, I'm going to stay around, I'm going to be with this person, but they also have to weigh out the threat of leaving is so much higher. They don't know who they are anymore in the absence of this person. The second component is, there's a moment where she starts to, I guess, write love letters to him. And that was also held against her in the trial. And so it's twofold. So first there's this component of trauma bonding, which means like she feels indebted to her captor and feels like leaving would be worse than staying. But then also I think that there may have been a subconscious part of her that did that because she knew that he wanted her to be in love with him, and it kept her safe and alive because he essentially wanted her to become his wife or whatever. And so it's amazing what survivors of abuse can do in moments to survive. And some of that is unconscious and some of that's conscious. I think it's a combination of two. But in the absence of all that, a person will really give up hope and die. And I think that she was able to develop enough internal strategy to keep herself relatively safe.
Yeah, the interviews I saw with her, she's asked that question, you know, what about these letters or what have you? And she says that she knew that she needed to write them, that he wanted her to write them, and that it was a way to survive. Now, I agree with you that in the moment, actually, she probably had feelings for him. You end up having feelings in those kinds of, it's not a bond for any other reason. I realize they're artificial, caused during artificial circumstances, but what ended up happening too was, you have to understand, the wife was there. The wife said, you can bring in another slave, because, by the way, we're pretty sure there was a first one. You can bring in another one if you don't sleep with her. Colleen was essentially brought in to take the pain because he was a sadist. And so the wife said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And she didn't have a high tolerance for it anyway. So Cameron was dissatisfied in his sadism. He brings in a non-consensual kidnapped woman to hold and take the pain, quote unquote. And the wife says, okay, as long as you don't sleep with her. And then, of course, after some time, he convinces the wife that he should be able to sleep with her because the Bible says that you can take more than one wife. And the wife, if you don't already know, was God-fearing. This starts to happen. So then Colleen starts to spend more time outside of the box. At first, for years, it was 23 hours a day. But when this starts to happen, when Cameron decides that this is going to be another partner of his, she's out of the box a lot. She's taking care of the kid they have. She's cooking them dinner. She's cleaning. She's sleeping in the bed. When the wife's at work, she's in the bed or playing wife with this guy. So there's just a lot of, I'm sure, cognitive dissonance and confusion around how she feels and what she's doing. So I agree with you that the letters probably had multi levels to them. Mm-hmm. I can tell you in her explanations, she talks about how, hello, I was trying to survive and this is what I needed to do. And I thought I was going to be there forever. I never ever thought I was going to be able to leave.
Yeah, she had to somehow make sense of it to survive and to have some semblance of a life.
Of course. And if this is the person that you're most intimate with, and as we know, pain and pleasure, coupling those two things together, because they were having sex and he was hurting her, and the captivity and all of that confusion, that creates a lot of confusion in your sexuality and how you feel. I can imagine that there were just a lot of really confusing feelings from time to time. And so then he agrees to let her go see her family. He takes her there. And she spends the day with like her sister and her dad and her mom.
Isn't that trippy?
And they're suspicious from portrayals I've seen, but, you know, she's telling them whatever. And then she leaves and goes back. And then, of course, she pays for that. She goes back in the box for several years after that, to like 23 hours a day after the visiting the family, because he got spooked, of course.
Of course.
I watched I think it was like a BBC documentary that was pretty good. It had her in it, and it was her interview.
I may have seen the same.
That?
I think that was one of the ones I
watched a Lifetime movie.
Yeah, I watched a couple of, maybe the BBC was one, but then I also watched one on him.
On Prime, there's a 2-part one.
Oh, is there?
I don't know if that's the one you watched.
These were mostly ones I found on YouTube. There's plenty on him, and then a couple of other interviews with her. Not that we're talking about Janice so much, but I think that we can also assume that there was a level of denial and compartmentalization through her own trauma bonding with her husband.
Because although it started consensually, if you can say that with a sadistic psychopath, it started consensually, like she was there hypothetically of her own volition.
And I think that at least there was some inconsistency around this, and maybe you can clear it up, because I found that there were two different versions of the end of this, but in one of them, Janice helped Stan escape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's true.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding is that towards the end, well, part of it was that Janice, like you were mentioning a moment ago, started to become resentful of the fact that Cameron was wanting more and more time with Colleen. Mm-hmm. And so through that, I think she woke up a little bit out of this proverbial coma and ended up helping Janice escape by taking her to her parents' home and to her own parents' home, and then Colleen called her father from there.
And the big part of that, I'll just interject really quick here. The big part of that is that she was given immunity because she agreed to testify against her husband. She agreed to testify against Cameron.
Yeah.
So that was the big thing that we know for sure. How she helped Colleen get away, I was fuzzy on the details. I'm not sure. Maybe it'll come out in the trial, but she was given immunity, which is pretty amazing because she helped her husband kidnap Colleen and was there and for the whole thing and never did anything and for 7 years. And I understand that we're saying that there was coercive control in their relationship too. So
there definitely was. To me, I mean, I didn't watch the Lifetime movie, but from all of the documentaries and clips that I watched, and I think I had texted you, this was like one of the most devastating and horrific captivity stories I have ever come across, because it wasn't just someone who, and I'm not minimizing what I'm about to say, but in a lot of these captivity cases, you know, women are chained down in the basement with shackles and they're thrown food and, you know, they're sexually assaulted, but it went beyond that. The level of captivity wasn't even a basement. It was a box, and sometimes it was a box over her head. She was completely locked in darkness. And I can only imagine through the profound levels of dehumanization, how she deteriorated. And watching interviews with her now, she's surprisingly, at least outwardly, somewhat okay.
Yeah, she went on and had a family and moved through her life. And yeah, I don't know how she is, but she definitely presents. I mean, she's giving interviews. She's, you know, she did these she was a part of some of these documentaries. I imagine she'll maybe be part of this trial.
Yeah, she has been open about some of the PTSD and the things that she still experiences. And there was one I was watching where she went back to do an interview and she said, you know, just pulling into the town, it was like
awful.
I mean, my God, how would you not start to feel heart palpitations and a chill and all these things? But I think relatively, at least the way that she presents, which I know is hard because I've worked not with anyone with this level of, you know, captivity or whatever, but I have worked with a lot of survivors of this type of abuse, and they don't always come across that regulated. So
no,
kudos to her.
I mean, I hate to say this, but perhaps one of the reasons why that is because she became a presenter.
Absolutely.
Through that whole trauma, being able to present to her family in the middle of it, being able to, she actually didn't go to the police for a while after she got home.
That's right.
And I understand because she still believed, she was still under these beliefs about the company was going to come and kill her family.
Oh, that's right. That whole threat.
So those threats were very effective. That narrative he created, and I understand what that's like, is someone creates a false narrative and you believe it, and that keeps you in control. And I think about her outside of the box, right? I think about her 1 hour outside, which for years was 1 hour of abuse and then back in the box. So there was no ability to come out of the box and feel relief. And then after several years of that, you come out of the box for hours at a time. You're able to shower, you're able to cook meals, you're able to interact with the family, etc., able to go outside and be in the sunshine. I can't even imagine what that's like, but my brain wants to say I would do anything to stay out of the box.
Well, that there lies, you know, here's another component of coercive control is intermittent reinforcement. Right. So I describe it to my clients like the slot machine effect, right? So you get this really, 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 really great reward and you'll do anything to get it back to the point that you will settle for this shit just to get back to that. And that was a tactic that he used very deliberately, is every now and then giving her this thing and then taking it away for periods at a time. So she would essentially do anything to get that back, and compromising so much of herself to have that. And the other thing that comes up for me as you're saying that is, when we talk about the different styles of defenses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, when a brain is traumatized, it essentially fragments from the emotional brain and the intellectual brain kind of split. And I would imagine that she had a lot of what we call that freeze response. So her ability to even like fully process her emotions was very threatening. And so she just learned to kind of shut down and freeze. And I think we still even see some of that in her presentation, as what looks like regulation in some ways is almost a numbness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Stockholm syndrome and all that.
Yeah, it's terrifying how, when we think of that term brainwashing, when we really think about it, it essentially is that how vulnerable our brain is. But the wonderful thing about that too is once that person gets out of that situation and can get the help, depending on how much trauma has happened prior to that incident or how profound the trauma is, the brain can also start to heal.
Absolutely.
But it needs a lot to get there. And I would imagine that some of her work at the beginning was just learning how to feel safe in her body again.
Yeah, and she changed her name, and now she helps people surviving trauma. Like, she's using her experience, which I know is part of the healing. It's using, she says that she received intensive therapy, and so now she's in a situation to help others. And I think that's not only helpful to others, but also helpful to her.
Sure.
Because we find that when people have survived a lot of things or bad addiction, etc., they can be helped by helping others as well. So I hope that feeds her soul.
Absolutely.
Too. So let's go back to, you were going to talk about something about a song or something, or a movie
there were movies and songs that were made based on her story. So like the Poughkeepsie tapes, I guess, is based on this case.
Yeah, that's a freaking scary found audio movie.
I never knew it was based on this case. So those of you, it has a cult following if you've seen it, and it's based on it. Again, it's not the same case, but you might be interested in this story. And then the song "Jennifer's Body" by Hole is also about it. And there's a line that says, "He cuts you down from the tree. He keeps you in a box by the bed." So apparently this song was also written about this story. So there were people who were making references to the story all throughout the 80s and 90s. It's interesting because I hadn't really heard of this case, but clearly there was a lot of influence.
Yeah, and you can see the culture was working through the severity of this too. I wanted to mention something that comes up for me is like, how can we ever relate or put ourselves into her shoes or understand what she might have gone through? And we can't, obviously, unless you've gone through something like that, in which case I'm very sorry, and I know you probably can relate. But one of the things that came up for me was, if you've ever been in a situation in your life, and honestly, I think this happens frequently. So just reflect and think about a time when a lover, a friend, a partner, a boss, someone in your family has ever kind of created a narrative around anything in life, whether around your history, whether around something that's happened to the both of you, or even just completely something fictional. Some new person you're dating tells you a whole narrative about their history or who they are or whatever, and you figure out that it's not true, but you were under the illusion that it was, and you made a lot of choices based on that. And then afterwards, you kind of come out of that fog. There's that cognitive dissonance of, well, did it happen? Was it true? Was that real? I don't understand. I made choices based on that, and it wasn't real, and I've been betrayed, and I'm confused. Like, I think that on small levels, slightly bigger levels, but nothing to the level of Colleen Stan, most of us have been in that moment of cognitive dissonance where we come out of it confused, and we can regulate maybe fairly quickly and maybe not. Maybe we need some therapy. Maybe we need to figure that out. But I think a lot of people can relate to the trauma bond and the coercive control on minor levels.
I think so too. I think it's hard to get through life without experiencing that at least a couple of times.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that in kind of a human to human way, where it's on a very microscopic level compared to what she went through, but that doesn't mean there isn't that empathic piece of you that can relate in some way to what she went through.
I think that's important too, because victims of abuse tend to be put in positions where they have to prove themselves. They have to prove their victimhood. Yeah. And it results in a level of pseudo justice that, people will be like, this is ridiculous. You could have left, and therefore they don't get their justice.
Yeah, and they may sit in therapeutic rooms with their therapist and feel like the therapist doesn't get it, and they need to explain every little detail. And I want to let you know that anybody who has a natural empathy or has reflected on a lot of the things that have gone on in their life and can sit with you in genuine empathy. Yes, of course they didn't live your life. Nobody has. But I do believe that there is empathy for you in those situations, even though someone hasn't been through as much as you may have gone through. So I just want to make that clear. But I also want to wrap this up by talking about the fact that, Kathy, there's going to be a trial. There's going to be this thing. How can you help us understand what's happening?
Well, he was given 104 years. He was sentenced to 104 years in prison in 1985. Mm-hmm. And I think there was X amount of decades that had to go by before he was able to go up for parole. And then he did in 2018, and that failed. And now here we are in August of this year. It's going to happen again. And the idea is that if he gets out on parole, then he will be sent to a conditional release program, which I have a lot of experience with because I've worked for a few. And a conditional release program essentially means that you are let out of prison under conditions where you live in a halfway house, you have a parole officer, you're very closely monitored, but you have certain freedoms depending on your level of care within the community, but you're having to report back a lot, right? And for folks who have committed offenses where they were mentally ill at the time, and whether they were found, insane, or whether they were just considered mentally disordered offenders, conditional release can be really helpful because it gives them an opportunity through the use of psychotherapy to make sure they're remaining medication compliant. They're not having episodes where they would become symptomatic again. And for folks who become symptomatic and their delusions or hallucinations are what we call command hallucinations, which is something is telling them to kill something, otherwise something bad is going to happen, right? It comes from more of a place of psychosis. Then conditional release programs can really help give these folks a quality of life, because if they're on medication and they're regulated, they can actually do quite well and go back into the world. My concern about somebody like Cameron Hooker is he's a fucking psychopath.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally trying to say, oh, he's not a sexually violent predator.
He is.
I can't wait to hear what their freaking argument for that is. How do you see that,
This
sir?
Isn't someone who had a blip on the map and snapped out of it and showed any remorse or dedication to becoming better, or there was no proof of a mental illness that would have interfered with his decision making. So mental illness alone isn't a reason to get insanity. It has to be a mental illness that they can prove interfered with his ability to know wrong from right, to know that what he was doing was harmful towards another person. He didn't struggle with competency, any of these things that we would see where conditional release, in my opinion, would be appropriate and helpful. This is a man who destroyed the life of a woman who will never get those years back, never get that sanity back. According to some of these stories, he had another victim. He victimized his wife. He was unremorseful, psychopathic. His level of sexual deviance was so profound that I don't believe, and this is me personally saying this is not me as a clinician saying this, I don't believe that he has any right to ever step fucking foot out in the community, whether it's under parole or not. I've worked in those situations where if they can manipulate their parole officers, they get more and more freedoms. And this is a guy who I think presents, even if you look at his photos from, the court and stuff, he looks like he can kind of milk this odd, empathic victim, like, I'm just a sad guy. Fuck you. You destroyed the life of someone and their family and their future. You knew exactly what you were doing. There was no psychosis involved. There was no empathy, or to me, I don't feel that there's any reason to justify parole, and I don't think that he's going to get it.
I don't either. He destroyed his wife's life as well, and they had a child. And so when he was convicted, he walked out of the courtroom and said, "I should have killed you."
Exactly. I mean, there's
this
nothing.
This is not a guy that gives a fuck about.
You don't get freedom from that.
Humanity.
No.
Yeah.
No. And even at 67 years old, we know that someone's likelihood of violence will, especially for men, goes down as they get older because of testosterone levels. But 67 is not 87. And he still has the capacity to go fuck some people up out there.
No, I'm sure they'll get some expert, psychological expert to talk about how those kinds of drives diminish as we age, because there's data around that. But no. Just no.
No. And we know that he is very good at manipulating people into his work. So even if he doesn't have the physical capacity to kidnap someone on his own, that's what he did the first time. He used his wife and his baby to do it.
Yeah, and as an older person, he could use that as a manipulation.
Absolutely.
Like stone cold manipulation. And if you don't think that he would use anything at his disposal as a manipulation, you don't want to be, don't be around people like this, because you'll get taken advantage of. And I agree with you. 67 is not 87 or 97. 67 to me is like, okay, 67. Like, I know
he still has his, facets.
I know lots of people in their 60s and 70s. Delightful, virile,
yes,
fabulous. Like, no, it doesn't work for me at all.
We'll revisit it, when we probably hit the new season in the fall to see what what comes up. But I'm going to bet right now he doesn't get it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hope not.
Yeah.
We would like that to be true. Let's manifest that, shall we? Whoosh. All right. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that. And we will catch you next week. This has been an episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.